afternoon everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on business continuity planning. My name's Yvette Adams and I'm speaking to you today from the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, and my company, the Creative Collective, is very excited to be delivering these webinars on behalf of DD, otherwise known as the Department of Employment, Economic Development and Innovation. Now, this particular webinar we actually did run last year a couple of times when the Bureau of Meteorology predicted that we were in for quite a natural disaster season, and as I'm sure you're all aware, quite a season it was. We had the cyclone Yasi, of course, extensive flooding throughout Queensland, and all in all, lots of damage wreaked. I really appreciate the fact that you've chosen to get online today during your lunch hour and find out more about business continuity planning. We can learn a lot from the season we've just experienced, and we're really proud to have hopefully offered some tips and maybe minimised some damage somewhere along the line last year as well. This is what we've got in store for you today. First up, we're going to just do a quick introduction and orientation. And for those of you whose first time it is on a webinar, we want you to know that this is a really interactive thing. It's not like school, so we will be encouraging you throughout the presentation to raise your hand and text in questions and things like that. We'll then revisit some points from the workbook. Now, I've been informed this morning that the workbook didn't actually go out as part of the emails you would have received. However, very soon after this webinar, via email, you'll receive a link to download the workbook for this particular topic. Now, with these webinars, you can always get the most out of the session if you actually do go through the workbook. There's some great exercises. That's a really good resource that Deedee's put together there, so I strongly encourage you to go ahead and have a look at that. We're sort of reviewing some of the items at the end of the webinar, and there will be time for questions as well. If I can't help you, hopefully I can refer you to someone who can. So that's my picture. That's what I look like. You won't see a live stream or anything like that today, knowing that a lot of you log on from all over Queensland and that broadband connections can vary from place to place. We found in trial and error that the best thing is to just show you a nice static picture. But to tell you a little bit more about me, I am an award-winning business owner. I'm really proud to have won the Commonwealth Bank Business Owner of the Year category at the Telstra Business Women's Awards in Queensland last year. That was against 4,000 other people. Our company, the Creative Collective, has also won on the Sunshine Coast, the Sunshine Coast Business Awards in our category of creative and knowledge-based industries. We also had some recognition at the Marketing Communication Awards last year, winning Best Home-Based Business. We're actually now operating out of premises, so it's been onwards and upwards since a great 2010. I've started 4 different businesses, so I tell people I'm a serial entrepreneur and a hopeless employee. My first business was when I was 17. It was a secondary school sports newspaper, and it was bought out after its first edition by an American entrepreneur. I then went on to run an online business, selling T-shirts online in fact, so I guess you could say I've had a little bit of experience with the retail and fashion world as well. Then there was the education portal yummymummy.com.au, which is still live online these days. And now my real focus, though, is being the owner, director and franchisor of the Creative Collective. So we're a creative services agency offering website design, graphic design and print, SEO, pay-per-click, social media and a whole lot more. But we do really enjoy offering training as well. So we do so via these live webinars, online courses, DVDs, etc. Now at this point I want to find a little bit more about you, and I want you to make sure that you can use this technology okay. So I want you, if you haven't already, to click on the red arrow that you should see somewhere on your screen, which is red box with a white arrow, and that should expand the menu bar, and then you should see a list of people participating, and there's a column there with a little hand. Now sometimes I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to indicate yes or no by raising your hand. So just to show me that you've got the hang of that, can you all raise your hand right now? Brendan's got his up, Carissa, David. Oh, you're all pretty quick off the mark here. I think we've got a pretty clever bunch. Good on you. And a little reminder to just put that down when you're finished as well, or else I'll unmute you and pick on you and think that you've got something that you want to tell me, which you're most welcome to do as well. Now, some people sometimes don't have, I can see someone, Helene, who's actually logged on there via phone, which is absolutely fine. You won't have that hand function, but feel free to let us know if you want to speak. Now there's also a text chat area, and we've got live online today Jag, our facilitator. If you've got any technical queries, you can't hear me, something's not working, you don't know what's going on, feel free to drop him a text chat and he'll be more than happy to help you. So anyway, let's get on with our presentation today. Now look, when it comes to business continuity planning, this is if you can just take one thing away from today's presentation, I'd like you to remember PPRR. Now what that stands for, the first P you can see on screen is prevention. And just like they say, prevention is better than cure, this is certainly the case when it comes to emergency and disaster management. So hopefully today I'm going to give you some ideas on how you can prevent being so affected by disasters when they do strike, because you really can't stop the disaster striking. All you can do is minimise the impact on your business. You can do that through being prepared as well, so we'll talk about that. Immediately after the disaster or emergency has struck, you need to work out what your response is. And we saw all different forms of responses from the Queensland Government, from emergency services, from the businesses themselves and the business communities. Everyone rallied around, as I'm sure you'll remember. And then, of course, recovery. And for many business owners, they're still very much in recovery mode. Just yesterday, I spoke to a gentleman in the Toowoomba region who just yesterday was moving back into his premises. He'd been operating a workwear company out of a temporary premises for the last 6 months since those floods struck. And he was very excited to be having an opening day, getting live radio crosses, etc. today to try and let everyone know that he's back in business. So it's quite amazing really when you think of those stories to see that people are still recovering, and we wish them all the best of luck with that. Now, to get to know you some more as well, I'd like you to raise your hands if you've been involved in a crisis, emergency or disaster as a business owner yourself. You could raise your hand if you have been. None of you? Jonathan has, Susan has, Ross has, David has. Well, I suppose the rest of you are feeling very blessed. Those of you who raised your hand, could you text chat me and let me know what was the natural disaster or disaster emergency you experienced? It'd be good to share those actually. As you text those through, Brisbane floods is what Susan experienced. It might be quite good to get you online later, Susan, and hear some of your stories. The others of you could keep sending those through and I'll continue in the interest of time. All right, looking at prevention, one of the first things you can do is evaluate risk. So step one, identify risks that could impact on your business. Now, within the workbook, there's a really great risk sort of spreadsheet, and I'm going to go through that with you in future slides as to what sorts of things we need to look at there. Next, you need to analyse those risks to assess their impacts. Step three, evaluate them and prioritise them. Treat the risks to minimise their impact, and then actually develop a risk management plan. So when you're a busy business owner, it can be difficult finding the time to get around to doing a risk management plan, because quite often we're dealing with the here and now. But as we've all realised, you know, when these disasters strike, they really make a massive impact on your business. So if you can actually find the time to run through a risk management plan before they strike, you'll be in a much better position when it does. Now, the thing about risk management plans is that businesses are ever evolving, so you need to actually constantly review this process. It's not something you do and think, I've done what Yvette said, I've done what the workbook said, and I can put that in the drawer and forget about it. Risks change all the time. Companies grow, they move premises, they offer different services and products, and they use different technologies to perform the tasks that they do. So you may see, as we can see on there, that new risks might be created. Existing risks may become less important. Some may no longer exist. The priority of risk may change, and the way you may deal with them may change as well. So I wonder, who has a risk management plan? Could you put your hand up if you do? Helene does, Kylie does, and Roseanne does. Well, that's really good that you three have. The rest of you, first action point from today, you've got a little notepad there, that could be a good idea. Perhaps write down risk management plan, and I'm going to give you a few more tips there. I just see a couple of text chats have come in from Jeffrey and Alyssa asking about the workbook. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, you may have misheard me or just jumped on a little bit late there. That will actually be issued straight after the webinar to your email. So rather than a previous thing, don't worry about it. You can look at it afterwards, so it is on its way to you. Now, what's the point of going through all this risk management stuff? Well, one is business continuity, and you can see on the screen, I'm actually not going to be introducing her today, but a client of mine, Alex Lawson, up in the Whitsunday area, who has Whitsunday Rent-A-Yacht, that was the sort of scene that she has experienced through Cyclone Louis, and they were also to some degree impacted by Cyclone Yasi as well. She was unable, because her business is purely renting out these yachts. It's a holiday thing, it's a lovely thing to do. They didn't have their fleet back in mobile. And even though they had insurance, they had to fight a really long time to get the insurance to actually pay up. And she was advised if she had those risk management things and could prove that she had those things in place and could prove that procedures and systems have been adhered to, they would have been more likely to pay up sooner and perhaps even have got more back. So there's a good reason to do it. You can actually reduce your insurance premiums by proving that you've got these sorts of documentation in place. You can also, depending on what you offer in business, reduce your chance of being sued. I'm sure none of us would like to think we could ever be sued. So by getting a risk management system into place, that can be something that can be used to fight these instances in court. It can also reduce the time when the business may be unable to operate. Because, you know, sometimes through these most recent disasters, it wasn't the fact that their business was necessarily impacted. Sometimes it was a supply chain issue that meant they couldn't operate because they couldn't get their goods, for instance. I know, for instance, I went through good old McDonald's drive-through, and they told me through that period that I could get a cheeseburger and nothing else because the supplier from Brisbane had been impacted. So right here on the Sunshine Coast, they could still operate. They were lucky, but they couldn't operate like they normally could selling a range of burgers. Also allowing for a plan to replace key personnel. I don't know about you guys who experienced the recent disasters, who are saying you did. You may have not had staff who are unable to get into work, who were unable to work from their usual place, who were maybe even in a disaster actually experienced injury or death as well. I know certainly in New Zealand with the quakes, that's something that they've experienced. Also reducing the loss or damage to machinery and other equipment. I mean, you can see that picture again there. Someone like Alex totally depends on those yachts being in good condition, good working order in order to operate her business. So if key equipment gets affected, then you can't operate. And also it's just generally strengthening your capacity to stay in business. We've seen instances of businesses that have gone under from the natural disasters, and that's not at all what Dee Dee or anybody wants to see. So that's why we offer these webinars, to hopefully give you a few ideas. Okay, so a risk management plan. Also, by the way, I can see Jonathan Taylor Jag is saying that he can't see the slides, just the cover slide. Could you perhaps respond to him with some suggestions? Thank you. Taking the time to identify risks. Now, look, you can get a spreadsheet like this and get some of these headers down, and again, I refer to the workbook. There's some great examples on there of how you can do a full risk management plan and actually some templates in there. But number one, you need to identify the risks. So to give you an example, a risk for our business would be to, for perhaps our, let's say a backup hard drive failed. That's a risk, because if all our backups are going to that hard drive, what would we do if that went down and maybe our computers were flooded, thieved, burnt in fire? So let's put that down. A further description would be all our data is backed up there. The likelihood of that happening, well, you can use codes like low, L for low, or medium for medium, or high, or VH, very high, if that's a high likelihood. I might call that a medium risk. The consequence would be very high, however, if we didn't have access to our files to operate. Mitigation, what are the types of things we can do to improve that situation? How would we act? Well, we've identified that we really need to have a second backup, and that needs to be stored off-site on a regular basis. So actions needed that we will back up perhaps every week, that a certain staff member will take it off-site, and that will also test the hard drive now and then to make sure the data is on there, because I've heard cases of people diligently doing their backups only to find that they weren't actually transferring the files, or the files were corrupt or unable to be opened. And another action is that hard drives should be replaced every once in a while as well, because they do fail. So there's an example of just one risk, and I know certainly lots of people lost in the floods, for instance. They lost servers. Some of them had them stored in car parks, that bottom lower floor. I'm pretty sure that some of them will be reconsidering perhaps moving them to higher ground for future sort of events like that. And another big one on that particular example would actually be storing data online. So it's stored in American servers, etc., and ideally one that has a server backed up in multiple international locations, because, gosh, imagine if your server was backed up in Japan, you may have lost it as well through their terrible natural disasters as well. Of course, insurance is pretty important as well. So ask yourself, what insurances do you have in place, and when was the last time I updated them? Right now, who's sitting there thinking, it was a while ago, I could probably do with updating them? Put your hand up if you think insurances are probably due for a bit of a review about now. Jook, and I hope I've said your name right. Jenny, Kylie, Tony, Brendan, thanks for being honest. This is really good, and that's why we love offering these webinars, is that we can all realise, we've got a lot in common with other business owners. It's okay to not be on top of everything, because it's a constant challenge, really. I know I try and get my insurances reviewed once a year, so perhaps here's a suggestion that you put it in your diarise, and actually getting a professional advice on your insurance options is a really good idea. Sometimes we can see insurance brokers as slick salespeople who want to sell us a lot of stuff that perhaps we don't need. But, I recommend, like anything, perhaps meeting with 3 different people, getting those 3 sets of quotes and going through what they recommend, and usually you'll have a pretty good gut feeling on which one knows their stuff and is a reasonable type of person to deal with. So the types of insurances you may need to look at: income protection insurance. If you were unable to get into your office and work through those Queensland floods, for instance, were you in any way protected and able to still get money coming in to pay your mortgage and just to live and, clothe your children and eat, etc.? What about life insurance? If you were to, touch wood, it never happened, but pass on, would your life insurance, or do you have any, pay out mortgages and existing debt so you didn't leave your family or anyone responsible for those? What about contents insurance? So I don't know if any of you are home-based businesses, but a lot of people think, oh, well, my business equipment just comes in under my home contents insurance. Well, you know what? If it's over a certain level, I think the level they deem is something like $2,000, it actually doesn't cover it. You're supposed to have separate business contents insurance, which is something I learned not the hard way, but after a few inquiries. So, and when you add up, all the cords and all the screens and desks and things, you realise that it doesn't seem like much, but it can actually add up to a fair bit. I know when we went around just doing a little insurance audit with just 5 staff members, we realised we had about $20,000 worth of equipment there when we were home-based. Also think if your circumstances have changed, because if you're offering services, you may well need professional indemnity insurance. If you are dealing with the public at all, you may well need public liability. Now, perhaps you didn't used to offer events off-site and now you do in the last 12 months. That might require insurance. Perhaps you didn't used to offer a certain type of service and now you do. So you may need to get a higher professional indemnity insurance and to add that service on the list. So every time there's a major change, you should go and see your insurance broker or look to update it, make it a priority, and every year at least just review it anyway. It's good practice. Okay, now we all have a plan A. What about your plan B, C and D? As we all learned through the natural disasters, maybe through personal experience or maybe through friends and family members who suffered, or contacts, business contacts, we need contingency and backup plans. So what are they? What are the types of things we can do? Well, number one is a quality control process, because you can have a disaster happen if there's not a documented process to check that quality is okay. Now, recently we run a webinar on workplace health and safety, And a Workplace Health and Safety Officer from Workplace Health and Safety Queensland talked to us about how there had been a death in a workplace she was aware of, and it was from a swinging gate that actually swung and killed somebody. Now, that gate was, and that whole incident wasn't a result of just the gate being faulty. It was a result of a series of events, often little events, and oversights by actually several staff members. And when it comes down to suing in situations like that, that's what they'll look at. Was there a procedure in place, and was that adhered to? So just consider, what are the core functions of your business? What are the high-risk ones? Can you document what actually happens and what should happen, what should be checked? Particularly, of course, if you're dealing with chemicals, but, you know, what about cords and tripping over and heat and anything like that? Is there a process, and can you document it? And I'll tell you what, Workplace Health and Safety, they have these officers that will come to your office and do a free site assessment. They're not coming to, you know, catch you out and tell you off and give you a big red cross. They're coming there to help you. So look into that great service that's provided there. Next on the list, we've got staff training. So hands up who engages in regular staff training with their staff if they have staff. Some of you still with me? Yes, Tony, Brendan, Susan, John, Megan. Great, you're doing regular staff training. You know what, that's risk management in itself, because if they're trained, they know what to do and when to do it, then that's a good thing. Have you considered, apart from training them how to perform the tasks they need to perform for the business, training them in this natural disaster or emergency stuff as well? For instance, is there an evacuation plan? Is there a place they meet? If you're not there and you're the boss, who's second in charge? And who's responsible for getting key equipment out, etc. What if you're away on holiday? And there were instances of that, weren't they, with the recent disasters? Who is going to go into the office and get the stuff out before the flood comes? So well worth, again, documenting that. Workplace health and safety, I feel like we've covered. Of course, you have to maintain facilities, plant and equipment. So, you know, if you've got machinery of any kind or plant and equipment, whose job is it to maintain that? You know, even computers, again, most people rely on them quite heavily. They can get dust. They need a service every now and then. So whose job is it in your office to do that? Is it the IT person? If you're a small business, do you have an IT person? And if it's yours, is that programmed in your diary to make happen? Because, again, you want to prevent rather than fix and have that issue. Appropriate security devices, that's pretty important, making sure we've got alarms and things like that. Pre-storm and cyclone season preparedness. Now, we're kind of in Queensland out of the season now. It's generally sort of October to March. But, you know, we will have another one. Every year these things come around, storms and cyclones. And look, storms can, as we all know, just strike at any time, hailstorms and things. Do you have a procedure in place? Perhaps in August, we're coming up to that period of September, to go around your office or any work sites that you're responsible for personnel and equipment, etc., and actually document that roof could do with a bit of a fix. That's, that outdoor setting could blow away, and whose job is it to bring that in? Is there a chain, or is there an area that can be brought in, and so on? Do you have, you know, tape to tape up those windows so they don't get blown in? And is there a place that we can relocate items should there be a flood? Are servers raised off the ground, for instance? Establishing appropriate systems and control is another one. Suitable backups of computers we've talked about. Careful selection of staff. You know, you can have a disaster. There's been examples on the Sunshine Coast recently of terrible fraud cases, and given the economic climate we're in right now, some people are really feeling it, and there's more crime than ever. So how do you monitor, you know, what's going through the books, how it's being documented, and can those systems be improved? Now, cloud computing is a big topic, and you know, most people probably sat there when the events of the natural disasters unfolded on television and thought, those poor people, and I certainly thought that myself. That was my first thought, and I hope they're safe and I hope they're getting out of there. But my second thought was, I wonder what they've got online backed up, and whether that will mean they'll be back in business sooner. Because you know what, if people were using online systems, cloud computing systems, that's what that means. It's in the cloud, it's online, it's not physically anywhere but cyberspace. Those people could have flown to Melbourne and continued to operate, or moved to another suburb that was safe, higher ground, or come up to the Sunshine Coast, because you know what, we were so lucky in that case, and maybe that would have meant they could continue running their business with not as much disruption. If you'd like to learn more about cloud computing and what some of your options are there, we actually ran a webinar all about that, which is available on our YouTube site, which I'll show you at the end how to access that. Emergency procedures and kits, that's a really good idea. So if people get injured on site, we'll talk about grab bags in a moment too. Evacuation plans, regular drills and tests. You know, when was the last time you did a fire drill, did a how to get out of the building if you can't use the normal accesses? Is there a window, is there a ladder, etc.? And particularly for new staff as well. So we've got a few ideas out of that slide alone. Hands up if that's given you a few things that you're thinking, might need to work on some stuff there. Thanks, Tony, John, Alyssa. Great, good to hear. I hope the rest of you are getting something out of that and perhaps just got your little brains ticking away there. Look, preparedness, it's the old Boy Scout motto, we're prepared. Remember that? Anyone here that were Boy Scouts or Girl Guides or Brownies amongst us? Few of you? Good stuff. So, look, being prepared is thinking about what you can do to be prepared. So being proactive, planning for an event, personal commitment. Don't ever think, as we all know now, I think it won't happen to me. Now, the unfortunate thing about that sort of concept is that last October, I was doing the same presentation, and we were really trying to connect with as many business owners in Queensland as possible and get them to think about this, and probably a lot still got off and thought, but it won't happen to me, I feel very safe. But as we know, 3/4 of Queensland got affected in some way by those natural disasters, so it can happen anytime to anyone, and the best you can do is to be aware of that and actually put some effort into prioritising the stuff. Now, I did mention just before considering window strength, and if you want more information on that, there's actually an organisation, if you weren't aware of it, called the Window Film Association, and that's their website address on screen now. They'll give us some tips and tricks, but good idea to have that safety tape in place, good idea to get some training yourself and or the staff members who will be responsible for taping up any large windows in the case of storms, which, as we know in Queensland, is quite a common occurrence. And if it's not the wind, it can be flying debris that can get us on that front. And hey, windows are expensive to replace, so good idea to think about that. Also ensuring the safety of your staff. Now, if there was a fatality or if there was an injury, you can imagine that the family would be pretty upset and they could be looking for someone to point the finger at. Now, we certainly wouldn't like to think that as a business owner that would be you, so strongly encourage you to consider this as well. And I mean, it seems like such a simple thing to stay away from windows, but you can't always presume that if you're born and bred in Queensland that everyone would know this. I myself, if you haven't already guessed, am a Kiwi, and I had no experience with cyclones until I came to Queensland, and it was only through asking friends and people who have lived here that they told me, you have to go in the bathroom, you have to take the mattress, good idea to wear the old thongs, the rubbered, anchored kind of thing. They're just things I didn't know about, so I had no experience with it. So my message to you is don't presume that all your staff know what to do in the event of this. Make sure they have had some training. They can have grown up somewhere else. They can have just, breezed through life without experiencing it. So good idea to give them a few tips on this stuff. And if you're like me and you're new to it all, then look, it's great that you're on this webinar getting a few tips and continue looking for that kind of thing. Now, another thing you can do from a risk management point of view is also a business impact analysis, otherwise known as a BIA. Has anyone heard of this concept before? You could raise your hand if you have heard of a business impact analysis. Jan has, Hayley has, and Carissa has. Susan's got her hand up, but I think that was from before. John has too. Good stuff. Okay, so what it is again, a bit of a spreadsheet, but by having these kind of columns, it commits you to thinking about this and giving some thought to it before the event actually happens. So I guess, again, with these natural disasters Queensland experienced, some businesses could not have anticipated the heavy impact that those events could have had of them. Things affected their businesses that they just couldn't have imagined. So If you could have done this before, you might have had a plan, you may have been able to mobilise a response faster or have recovered quicker. So first up, here's an example. What's a critical business activity that you do? So give it some thought, and there's probably going to be rows and rows depending on what you do. In this case, this person's got production services, and they do a production of customised widgets for individual customer orders. This is obviously a total example. That's a high priority for them because that's what they do. So what would be the impact of loss? So they're saying if something was to happen, it would reduce our revenue by this much per week. So consider the financial impact. Build up of stock and inventory related to slow down. Customers will source alternate suppliers. They may or may not come back to you. That's an impact. You may be unable to meet business overheads like rent and staff wages because they'll still be there. And there could be job losses after even 2 weeks. So they worked out after 2 weeks, if that was unable to be actioned, there would be an impact. So give that some thought. Again, in that workbook you'll get supplied, there's actually templates, and I encourage you to commit not so long. You know, it might only take you half an hour, an hour to go through and complete a business impact analysis for your business, and that again is a task that I encourage you to do again in the future. All right, we've looked at being considering prevention, we've looked at being prepared. Now I want to look at response. So what did business owners do when the disaster struck? How did they and their team respond? Well, here's a good idea, is to actually put an incident response team together. People that you know will have the expertise to understand the crisis and come up with and implement solutions. So look, some examples are, you may not nominate the youngest person in your team because they may not have the maturity, life experience to deal with the situation. Or you may well nominate the youngest person because they are actually someone who responds well to a crisis. You've seen them in some example that you think, you know what, they'd be a really good person. Susan has just suggested EMO, Emergency Management Officers, is what you could call that person perhaps. So an incident response team should include a team leader. Now that team leader may be you because you may be the business owner, but again I suggest you have a second in charge. If you're not around, who's going to step into that role? Are they equipped to? Are they trained to? Do they know the drill basically? Who's the response team? If you're a small business, it might be everybody that needs to respond. If not, if you're a bigger business, it might be the entire management team. The assessors, so do you have someone within your team who would do that, who would go around working out what damage has there been, what losses have we had, or would you actually have a preferred company that you would bring in? So good idea to have that company, have that phone number, have that personal relationship with that person before disaster strikes, or else you'll just be another one in the queue ringing up trying to get onto somebody. A spokesperson as well. Now this may or may not be you. If you're not one who is good with the cameras, not good in an emergency, you fall to pieces, you're probably not the person to be the spokesperson, but maybe you've got someone in the office, a marketing person, just someone who's well spoken, again, someone who handles a crisis well, that you don't mind being a spokesperson for you. Hands up if you think that would be you. You'd be okay with being the spokesperson for your business. Should say, the media want to know what's happened to your business, what's going on. So Brendan, David, Alyssa, they all said they'd put their hands up. Not many other hands going up, so you better think who else that may be. Now, if you're an individual business owner, you may have a PR company or someone that you have asked and again built that relationship with. Should there be a disaster, did you know your number's down to be contacted, and make sure that they're aware of that. Now look, there could be others, and you need to make them aware that should there be a crisis, it has to be their top and only priority. You want them to drop everything else, and responding has to be the case. Actually, I'm going to ask now to unmute someone, because I would like to know from someone who raised their hand before who has experienced a disaster, who were the people who stepped in for them, what you did to respond. So, Tony, am I right in thinking you had your hand up? Could you put your hand up again if you don't mind just chatting to me? Who are the others that had those disasters? I should have made a little note of that. Susan's got her hand up, so thanks. I'll unmute you. Susan, can you hear me okay? I'm not getting any sound from you now, right now, Susan. If you could maybe adjust your mic or sound setting, give it a little bit longer, and if not, we'll just let somebody else have a go. No, we're not having. Oh, she doesn't have a mic, so that won't be any good. We do need people with mics to suggest. Alyssa, you've got your hand up. Are you there, Alyssa? Nope, she's got her hand down. Just love an opportunity for someone to share their story with the recent natural disasters at this point. Would someone like to raise their hand that does have a mic and might be able to just share a word or two? Don't be scared. No volunteers. How about that? I can pick on people. David's got his hand up. Thanks so much, David. David, can you hear me okay? David, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Yes?
Not having
Hello?
much luck there either. Either you'll have a actual mic, you'll have a headset on, or your computer will have an inbuilt mic in order to participate in this section of the webinar.
Hello? Hello, 1, 2, 3.
Maybe if we're not having much luck with this interaction part, Jeffrey's got his hand up now. We'll try him. Oh, all these people could hear David and I couldn't. That's really strange. Jag, any clues? Could you hear David? Okay, well I couldn't. I'm going to unmute you again, David, then. Why can't I hear David? Can we hear him?
I'm
Jag?
talking 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
My microphone indicator's responding okay.
I can't hear him, so I'm just going to move where I'm speaking from, and I'll do by Jag so I can hear you and we can have a little chat.
Muted.
Okay. David, do you want to try
1,
again?
2, 3, 4. Hello?
I got you now. Okay, thanks for your patience. I'm not sure. Usually we had a problem with that two-way thing, but we're good now. Okay, David, so where were you? What disaster are we talking about?
I was an employee of a company that had a mining company that had a pipeline failure, and so they couldn't export any product because the pipeline was shut down for 2 months.
For 2 months, right. And so what were some of the impacts on the business as a result of that?
Well, they nearly shut down. So, I mean, they had to find things they didn't actually lay people off. They did a lot of preventive maintenance that they didn't have planned but was sort of to be done in future times. So they brought that all forward so they could keep their people employed. They also built up their stockpile, did things that they wouldn't normally do until later, but because they had the time to do it now, they used the time.
And I guess as well, just because we were just talking about response and having a team, did they have some kind of team together that helped communicate what was going on to staff, maybe media or anyone else?
Well, it's a publicly listed company, so they obviously immediately had a response team which purely was working on repairing the pipeline, but they also had to put out press releases because they were a publicly listed company and let people know what they were doing, and also let their employees know what they were doing. And it was a separate. I wasn't actually part of the response team, but there were a lot of people running around and a lot of equipment coming in and specialist contractors doing specialist things, just trying to get the pipeline up and running again.
Sure. I'd like to make a point there too that even though they were a publicly listed company and were in the position where they had a PR company, every business owner should have someone like that, because sometimes no news is bad news. I mean, they say, you know, any news is good news as well. But when people don't hear, when they don't know what's happening, they start making assumptions, and that can be just as disastrous when people get the wrong end of the stick. Chinese whispers are going around staff that they're going to be laid off, and they might start looking for other work when, hey, that's not the case at all. Things will get better and be back on track. So, yeah, I really encourage everyone listening in that they should have some kind of PR team or go-to person should something happen. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Everyone was worried because it was touch and go whether the company would actually survive. I mean, not to be able to produce anything for 2 months is a fairly big hit, and it was during the economic crisis as well, so there are a lot of other pressures happening as well. So.
Okay, well thanks so much for that, David. I'm just going to go back to the other room and I'll mute you again. Thanks for contributing, and we'll just continue with the presentation.
I'll start again.
Okay, is it possible you didn't just hear that, so I'll start again. Right now on the screen you should see a slide which has got your incident response plan. So apart from having a response team, we actually recommend you also have a response kit. Now this could also be called your grab kit or go bag, because people call them different things. You can see there on screen a few examples of the types of things you might have to have at the ready. Now, I know, again, growing up in New Zealand where earthquakes are quite prevalent, every household would recommend to have one of these emergency kits of some description with water and food, etc. But just imagine that there was an incident at your business which meant that your staff were required to stay at the business for a period of time, or conversely, imagine there was an incident which meant you had to evacuate quickly. You need to have the right things in that bag. So here's a few tips on what could be in that bag. And if you don't have this set up, I strongly encourage you as an action point to go away and create one or delegate the task to someone in your organisation to get this happening. Number one is clear direct instructions for the first hour after a crisis hits. So literally within there may be an emergency manual of some description. Now it doesn't need to be pages and pages. It should be easily able to be followed. It may well have checklists, which you can see over on the right-hand side, that anybody can follow, because again, maybe key staff members just aren't around. It should have a list of response team members and their backups, as well as a detailed explanation of their roles and functions. So if it hasn't been communicated to them for any reason, it may well say in that document, you know, should there be an emergency, this is what I expect you to do. Look, the emergency kit should really contain critical documents. Ideally, these documents will also be backed up online in case this kit gets ruined, but some people did experience through natural disasters that they needed to call the insurance people, they needed to call the PR team, they needed to call their suppliers, they needed to call a bunch of people, and maybe their phone got wet or burnt or, you know, was left behind or something. So sometimes the old paper copy can be not a bad idea. Now let's say again, your phone has all those important numbers in it, your mobile, but you're not there, then your staff member is going to need a document of who these key people are so they can easily take it off site. Contact list, like I just said. Now, Google Docs or other cloud computing systems, again, these crucial documents should be uploaded somewhere online. So maybe your insurance policy, any security codes and passwords, some key contacts, any documentation that if you lost, your business would you know, be in a bit of trouble. So I know, for instance, all our tax forms and things we've been getting online, we figure they're fairly important. Business registration certificates, any kind of documentation like that, maybe you need to get around to scanning all that and getting it online. Your evacuation plan. Now here's another suggestion as an event log to record information, decisions and actions. So that could literally be, you know, what happened, exact date, time, who, etc. Because sometimes insurance companies will need to see that. Sometimes emergency services will need to see that, and if they get an event log from you, they'll just think you're the most organised people out. It really help them. Also a list of personnel who have authority to get the plan into place. So who's got some ideas off that one? A bit of a go bag, a grab bag. It all seems quite negative, but this is a very positive thing actually to have in place. Okay, mobilising a response. Now, I've been recommending Twitter as a communication tool for quite some time. I've been using Twitter since 2008. But it's only really now, I think, after the floods that people really get that this Twitter and Facebook don't have to be a social thing, a fun thing, a muck around thing. They can actually have tangible results and really come into their own when there's a disaster. Now, there were lots of incidences through the Queensland floods and Christchurch quakes and Cyclone Yasi where people were rescued, or the exact situation on the ground was received by Twitter much faster than it made it to the media and other channels. So I know, for instance, I was on my mobile looking at Twitter when the Japan earthquake and tsunami struck, and I said to my dad, who I happened to be with, wow, there's been a big earthquake in Japan. And he said, when? I said, 6 minutes ago. He said, how do you know? And I said, Twitter. We went and put the television on to see if there was any footage. It was a good half an hour before anything came out. And I sat there watching my Twitter and some of the news networks I'm connected to on there, giving updates, saying, you know, this many people are lost or missing, presumed dead. And it was always quite a long time after that that the media channels were featuring that. So, you know, here's an idea. Do you have Twitter? Could you get Twitter? And could that be a way to let your employees know about what's happening with the disaster, let your clients know, and so on? I know some companies have had situations where national office looks after their social media only, and they have that one overarching sort of account, but I have also seen a trend towards local and regional offices having their own, because then they have their own voice. Because, for instance, say a franchised multiple office network, you know, probably Melbourne and Sydney were operating A-OK, yet people needed to know that their, I don't know, Innisfail or further up north areas, Townsville, etc., were not at all operational throughout Cyclone Yasi. You need to be a good communicator when it comes to a disaster. You need to manage information effectively. One point is that you should perhaps assume the worst case and that the situation will escalate. And there's other experts who have talked about PR, but perhaps having a legal team, security team, you know, can you get the premises locked up, because sometimes there's situations of looting, etc. Other management team that can help you coordinate a response. You know, if you've got a big team, a big staff, it probably won't just be one person or a couple of people. You may need outside professionals to help you look after these staff, communicate with these staff, and just really make sure that everyone is okay. Heads up, out of interest, those of you who do have a Twitter account and maybe do use it to distribute key messages in a really quick way. Brendan does, Renee does, Jeffrey does. Fantastic. It's maybe something to consider for the rest of you. I know, for instance, the airline industry are using it very much at the moment with the big volcanic ash cloud to communicate with people, and it's a great thing because people can be at the airport wondering if they're flying out or not, and at least monitoring progress on their mobile phones. Okay, so more on recovery, which is the last R. How will you bounce back? So recovering, as you can see on screen, is broadly divided into resumption or continuing of business and also restoration of any resources that were affected. So after the crisis, it's important to assess the extent of the damage caused. So you should record any injury to people, staff, clients, other members of the public, because they can sue you, and if you've got a record of that and you can see that they weren't injured and they came along and said they were, that could be a good sort of backup for you. Has there been any damage to your reputation, and what PR or other sort of strategies could you come up to improve that? What impacts on your business functions? Actually, I'll just go back a step on that reputation. You'll notice, for instance, that tourism in Queensland, I'm sure you'll all agree, has been quite impacted. People think we're devastated and that we're not open for business, which is why right now Queensland Tourism is doing quite an extensive advertising campaign to try and improve the reputation of Queensland, and so people know it's open for business. The impacts on your business functions, damage to buildings and equipment, staff reactions. You know, sometimes staff can be pretty rocked by natural disasters, and they're not going to be any good to you if they're not just in a good mental state. So accept their opinions, their feelings, offer support. Sometimes just a cuddle and a smile and a reassurance can be the simplest thing, but a really effective thing, and sometimes it can actually be forgotten about when things are all a little bit crazy. So look, after the crisis, what activities can you undertake to get your business to recover? Continuing to communicating throughout the whole process really is so important. So thinking of the press and press releases like David mentioned, Twitter and other social devices. I can see Jennifer Hall has said that they're using Facebook and LinkedIn so far. Susan Ennis has also said that they're using mobile text. So that's a good way to communicate. That's a way that your staff and clients or suppliers accept information well. Ensure that staff understand and are collectively working towards the recovery efforts. Get them on board. I'm sure they value your business, they value working for you, they'd rather probably work there than go and find somewhere new. So find ways that you can incorporate them into that process and keep communicating with them. Give them weekly updates in whichever way, whether that's email or a meeting or a webinar maybe, just like we're doing now, and let them know how things are progressing. Make sure that you have adequate insurance coverage. If you learn from unfortunate disasters that you didn't get it in place so that you're not affected next time. Of course, we've seen some terrible examples of people who thought they were covered and actually weren't for certain events like floods, for instance. So perhaps actually moving providers will be required. Impacts on your business functions, and once again, I remind you not to forget the human aspect of crisis recovery. People are people at the end of the day. They have feelings, and we need to remember that. So look, in summary, our top tips from today's presentation is, number one, have a go bag. That's that bag with all the important documents and resources in it, so that if you need to get out quick you can, or if people need to respond to a crisis, they have the resources they need. Identify your risks, so we're all going to go off and do risk management plans, I hope. Have a business continuity plan of some kind. Cloud computing and backup up's pretty important. Actually, that have a BCP should be a BIA or business impact analysis thing prepared, and overall a business continuity plan, which is all of these types of things brought in together. And once again, there is stuff within the workbook related to that. The business continuity plan, there's a template actually on this link here, which will help you go through and create action plans to kind of make sure you're in the best position that you can be. It's a step-by-step tool, and once you've completed it, you'll be in a great position. So people questions, we've talked about all sorts of things today, and I hope you've got a few tips. I encourage you not to log off yet. I've got a couple of quick announcements after the question phase, but in between, any hands want to be raised for questions? Any comments on what we've had so far? Love your input. Jennifer's asking, Jag, could we type the BCP link, which we'll certainly do in just a moment. No problem at all. Anyone with a mic like to put their hand up and comment on something we've said, or maybe a light bulb idea they've had from today's presentation? Susan's got her hand up. Did we have any luck with Susan's mic last time? We'll give it another go. Susan, are you there? Susan, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am now. Hello.
Hi, Susan. Yes. Did you have a comment to make?
Hi. Yes, my husband's work was severely affected by the floods, but we used our house as a base to help the workers get to work. So just because your employees may not be able to get to work, they may know someone that can still help your business in making it function. Like he works in the disability field, and they had several homes in the residential home area, and we managed to be able to get staff and direct them through the traffic areas to get to work, so that they could still have people and refreshments and replenishment.
Sure, and there were some amazing people through those floods, weren't there, who did provide refreshment. Something simple as that human aspect again. A cup of coffee, a sandwich went a long way, didn't it?
Well, these disabled people, they just a hot meal helped them.
Thank you, Susan. That's a great contribution. Have you enjoyed today's session?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else like to give me some comments, feedback, anything? Raise your hand, or I will wrap it up with a couple of last slides. No, you're a quiet lot. Usually got all sorts of hands going up. Okay. Now, this webinar that you've enjoyed today, thanks to Dee Dee, we've actually been running regular different topics, so not just this topic, 25 other topics, everything from social media to attracting new customers to your business, a marketing type topic, to financial management, a financial type topic, and many, many more. And if you would like, if you've enjoyed this and you'd like to see what past webinars we've done, who we've spoken to, tips we've shared, you can find them on YouTube, youtube.com/ Oh, it's actually, I've got the wrong one up there. I've just realised it's DA, the Creative Collective. Tell you what I'm going to do is I'm just going to exit here. I'm terribly sorry. This is the, can you actually, oh, that isn't good. Dad, can you text them the correct link just so they can click on that? I'll show you it on the screen as well. It's in fact that. When we went to get the Creative Collective, it wasn't available, so go check those out. Now, I don't know if you're all aware either, but Dee has an amazing website. There is so much on there, everything from templates to benchmarks, if you want to benchmark your business against another in the same industry in terms of what turnover might be realistic over what time frame and so on, checklists and so on. So do go onto their website, check it out. There's a search area and you can go from there. Now, there's also a 1300 business hotline that Dee offers, which you may or may not be aware of. If you ever have a business query or someone you deal with does, it's a really good place to start. And if they can't help answer you, they will most probably be able to put you in touch with someone who can. So that number, 1300 363 711. Now, finally, we do need your feedback. It's important, it's a part of our contract with Dee that after every webinar we solicit feedback from the participants, and whether you thought this was fantastic, ordinary or not so good, we'd like to know. Hopefully you did think it was good though, by a quick tick and flick survey which is being sent out to you right now by JAG. Here it is, there's the link, it's just come up on my screen. The workbook David's asking after, as I've mentioned a couple of times today, will be emailed to you today. So check your email inboxes and there'll be a downloadable link to check out that workbook. And you will absolutely get the most out of the session if you do take the time to download that. And it's some great templates and resources on some of the things we talked about, like risk management and so on. So thank you so much for joining us today and giving up an hour of your time. I hope you found it useful and got some good tips. And I'd say, based on the hands and responses, there's a few little action points for quite a few of you to go away and do. So do go away, be safe, and I wish you all the best with your